Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Laura Van Daken with the Ames marketing team, and I'm going to be your host during the webinar. I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Taking S&OP to the Next Level with Supply Chain Analytics. Today's webinar will cover how the combination of S&OP software and embedded prescriptive analytics can provide signals to help you identify opportunities and potential risks. We will also share a demo to help you visualize how this sort of information can help you make strategic decisions. It's my pleasure today to introduce our presenter, Chris Gordon, our VP of Product Management for SC Navigator. Chris has worked in supply chain consulting and operations across Europe, the US, and India for over 25 years. He's driven dozens of supply chain initiatives with a heavy focus on looking at analytical evidence to promote major business change. He's a frequent blogger and speaker about supply chain analytics. He's very passionate about the field, and he's actually speaking at the upcoming Connections 18 conference in June. So if you're planning on attending, feel free to connect with him. So let's get started. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Laura. Analytics in supply chain. A lot of organizations are talking about it. Gartner have written a lot about it. They've written a lot of very interesting stuff. And what I notice is that there's a lot of confusion out there because everybody's claiming capability, and there's a nervousness because it is a complicated subject, and there's very little effort going into making it approachable. And I'm fortunate I speak to a lot of supply chain executives. And when I speak to those supply chain executives, often there's a feeling that they don't want to get left behind. So until recently, the solution, if you want supply chain analytics, the solution has really been to build a high-end analytics team of highly focused OR experts, modeling experts, to build that capability for you. But in fact, it needn't be a mystery because it's been around for a while, and we've been around for a while. We've been around for almost 30 years, and we've been in this analytics business. And one thing that we notice is it's got to get easier. So we're very much focused on making this kind of capability more accessible. And we talk a lot about democratizing supply chain analytics. For a moment, let us talk about analytics, the different types of analytics. So what you have is descriptive analytics, which is really the area owned by the likes of Tableau and Click and Microsoft, and it's really focused on what's happened and getting a good view of what's happened. We'll hop over diagnostic and we'll look at predictive, and predictive is of course very important to supply chain. It's really where forecasting comes to life, and it's what will happen, or more likely, it's what's probable to happen. And then you get to the area where we're really focused on, which is prescriptive. What should I do about it? And that can manifest itself in terms of decision support or decision automation. And we're really passionate about this area. I'm really passionate about the prescriptive area because this is where action's taken. And obviously the actions that are taken result in business benefit. So that's a broad overview of analytics. And then if you look at S&OP from a business process, and there's usually, whether you use any kind of technology, any kind of process, it follows 5 different steps. The first one is, what is the time period that you're working on? And then there's individual review for commercial stakeholders to have their view. And then the demand team comes together and brings a kind of cohesive picture together before you bring in the supply team for the capacity review. And here's where some decisions are made. Practically all organizations are working with finite capacity. And then finally, the decisions that can't be made in the capacity review are made in a financial review or an executive review at the end. And what's really surprising is that these are two very different worlds, the analytics world and the S&OP world. And they often don't come together, and they really need to come together. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And the first one is analytics projects alone. You may build an incredible model, you may build an incredible application, but and some of them are very successful. But if the business isn't fully involved, a lot of these projects are left on the shelf. And if you just focus on business process alone, well, without any analytical insight, it can be boring. I've spoken to many executives that really dread their weekly or monthly S&OP meeting because they're just arranging things rather than getting any insight and then really getting into the major strategic decisions that they want to get into. So what I believe is that business process is actually a fantastic delivery vehicle for supply chain analytics, and particularly S&OP because it's so broad. And right now, today, there's definitely going to be opportunities in your business that your gut's telling you exist, and they really need to see the light of day. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move over, and we're going to show some technology. It'll take me a second to set up here, and what we're going to do is we're going to go to AIMS SC Navigator. And it's a cloud-based application, so that we're building a session in the cloud. So the situation here is that it's a healthy snack food manufacturer, and they're planning across the domestic US market. They produce and they distribute. And the first thing that you see here is the different geographical regions, the West, South, Midwest, and Northeast. And here what you also see is a combination of production sites and distribution centers in Sacramento, Kansas City, Dallas, and over here in Allentown. Then if we go beyond that and we look at the classification type, what we see is very different channels that they bring their product to market in. And they've got the mom and pop store, the wholesale. Interesting in green, you see a lot of green. It's the major chain, and the major chain is really what they grew from. It's one of the reasons they're becoming quite successful. They've got a minor chain, and what you don't see on here is the online sales, which has really only been a recent focus for them. So let's take a look a bit closer inside their business. So supply chain's complicated, and it's got obviously various layers in it, and you see some of those here. So what you see is two major types of production lines. You see the fruit snack production lines and the vegetable snack production lines, and you see these in each of their sites. And the production costs for these lines are different. Then you move across, and what you see is the delivery channel, and the preference for the delivery type within each channel. And it could be parcel, it could be bulk delivery. The major chains like to collect from their local distribution center. Down here, you've got the transportation costs. So that the transportation costs are different by transportation type. They're also different by region and across regions. And then what you see over here is the average selling price. So what you find with the average selling price is that it's different. They're able to achieve different pricing based on the type of product, but also different pricing by the different types of channels. So obviously the major chain, they achieve less, although with the major chain, they also collect from the distribution center. So this is typical. There's a lot going on. The production capacity is somewhat strained. And like most organizations out there that use S&OP, they're using Microsoft Excel. And they've stretched it to their limits, and they're in full firefighting mode. And they're unable to create the time so they can really get into the insight and the analytics and get into the important decisions that their gut tells them that they need to make. So they feel that something's moving out there, something's changing, but they can't quite put their finger on it. And they certainly can't quantify what that is. So what we're going to do is we're going to bounce around a little, and we're going to go into the kind of hardcore process of S&OP, but also work on some of the analytics components as well. So the screen that you see here is typically what you would a process facilitator would use, and what you see here is the 5 different components, which is the current period, the individual forecast, the collaborative forecast, the capacity review, and then the financial review. And what you see here is the configuration. So we've loaded a configuration. It happens to be a demo configuration, but what we see out there is organizations that do S&OP across the globe. Often they've got different configurations. So in a less mature market with less capability, they might have a more basic S&OP, and in a fully matured market, they might have all the sophistication that they need. And what you see down here is the different commercial owners. Elizabeth here is responsible for minor chain. And actually, we're going to show you, and we're going to start the individual forecast. So the forecast window is now open, and we're starting the second step of S&OP. So first of all, what you see here is really the nuts and bolts of S&OP. So what you can do is you can kind of slice and dice your data. You can look at the as many filters as you like to isolate the either the business line or the category type. And what you see here is some reference data. So here what we've got is an initial forecast and a budget. They happen to be similar because it's at the beginning of a cycle. But what we see is our clients like to see lots of reference data. It helps them think. And so they may see other descriptive data as well. They may see, for example, last year's performance. They may see last quarter's forecast. And what Elizabeth's role here is to do is to look at this data and add basically her view of what she thinks demand might be. And I'm going to make a couple of minor changes here. And the reason that Elizabeth's making this change is she's out there in the field, and she feels that demand is a little different to what the forecast says. So she's able to commit those changes, and there's a record of those assumptions as you move forward. So it's recorded. It allows people to put their kind of caveats around the forecast, and we feel that that typically allows people to get a much stronger forecast. They're really stakeholders in it. Now, what we're going to do now is there's a switch down here, and it's the first kind of analytics that you're going to see. And what we're going to do is we're going to show the product lifecycle. So there's an application within SC Navigator called Lifecycle Navigator, and it takes 2 approaches to understand where a product might be in its life cycle. The first one is to compare it with its subcategory performance, which is very useful for seasonal products. And the second approach is to compare it with historical performance and to identify outliers. And what you see then is that the fruit, in this case, the apple-based product is shrinking, and the vegetable-based product is growing. And what that allows Elizabeth to do, it's an extra layer of insight, something that may not have been originally obvious to her, is really brought to life from an analytics perspective. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move through, and we're going to move to the collaborative forecast. So we'll go back to the control panel. This is where the facilitator will be. And we're going to start the collaborative forecast. Assume here that all of the individual with the commercial stakeholders have really had their say here. And if we click on here, what you're going to see is really the case study itself is going to emerge. So what you see in dark blue here is the budget and the original forecast. I'm sorry, that's in the lighter color, and the dark blue is actually what's happening to this business. So what's happening here is the major chain has launched. It's seen how successful they are with this product. They've launched their own white label product, and they're transitioning hard over to that white label product because the margin for them is much more attractive. The minor chain here, what you see is that there's some introduction of some competing products in the market, maybe lower quality, but they're really having an impact on the minor chain. Mom and pop and wholesale are continuing to grow in a fairly steady way, but actually the demand for the online business, mostly because the product and the launch of their vegetable-based snacks, there's a lot of demand for them, and consumers are trying to access them directly, and they're buying online from their own website. So the question here is, are they going to sense these changes? Early product life cycle signals can give them a hint of that, but it's not just about are they going to sense these changes, what are they actually going to do about it? And are they going to respond in such a way that allows them to grow? So what we see here is something similar, but the situation is different. So what you've got at the moment is it's the first time that the demand teams come together, and they can once again slice and dice the data. And in slicing and dicing the data, what they're able to do is they're able to make changes to their forecast. Once again, you see the product life cycle come to life to give insight. But also what we've got here is we're showing the channel performance. And the channel performance itself adds quite a lot of insight. So if you think about it, how you look at demand going forward, and how you consume these early signals and make decisions based on it, then it's really important to have this information available to them in something more than just that, a whole series of grid of numbers. So we'll go back to the control panel, and we're going to move into the capacity review. And the capacity review is really the fun part, where optimization starts to play a role. And I'm going to press this button, and this is a button that I really have learned to love, optimize button. And what's effectively happening here is the capacities that have been input into the model for the different sites, for the different lines, for the different transportation matrices, the different average selling prices, they're all brought into play at the moment. And what happened there in the background was very powerful optimization within play, and many thousands of iterations have been used to get this initial answer. And typically until now, this level of optimization has only really been available to the organizations that can afford a really large pool of resources. So we're going to run a series of scenarios here. And the first scenario here is 100% of demand has been fulfilled. You can see that over here. They've captured obviously all of their revenue. They've made $43 million in margin. But what you see here with these red lines at these production facilities is they've breached their capacity. And they've managed to do that by tying in third-party manufacturing and working overtime on the lines, working weekends. But there's really been an additional cost to do that. And what you can see here is, as you scroll down, you can also, what becomes apparent is the different margins by the different channels. So major chain is relatively low margin. When you come over here to the online business, and I hope you can see that, all of a sudden you've got some really fat margins emerging there. So what we're going to do here now, because we want S&OP to be more interesting, is we're going to run some scenarios. So the base scenario that you see now, then you've got to satisfy within region. You've got to satisfy your demand within region, apart from the online business, which you can satisfy from anywhere. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up that capability across regions. So even though the transportation costs are going to be different, the model's going to take that into account. The model's going to take that into account and absorb those additional transportation costs where it merits. And once again, of course, it's breached capacity, but margin's going up $4 or $5 million. And that's because we've managed to use some facilities that are more affordable. We've managed to use them more effectively. And really flexing the ability to meet demand across the different facilities has really helped quite a substantial amount. It's increased their margin by effectively 10%. So some of the outlying areas are expensive to deliver, particularly the mum and pop stores. They're making some fairly small orders. They're valuable orders because there's so many mum and pop stores. And to date, that's really gone on milk run vehicles. So, you know, vehicles that are making many stops, but it's quite expensive. So all we're doing here is we're allowing the application to use parcel delivery if it makes sense, if there's a commercial advantage to doing that. And once again, optimization's going on in the background. You'll learn to appreciate that there's a lot of stuff occurring there. And what happens is, once again, the same demand has been satisfied, but the margin's gone right up. So delivering to those outlying areas has really, with making that available to parcel delivery, it's really made quite a big difference. Now, you can't always breach capacity within a facility. In fact, typically you cannot. So, of course, the scenario here is they were using a third-party capability, third-party manufacturer, and they've had some traceability issues, and they've got to bring everything back in-house. So what we're going to do now is we're going to enforce the capacity within their facilities. And what's interesting is the switches on the left, we call this an insight bar. Instead of having to go through sophisticated modeling and adding new layers of code, you just turn a switch. And then what you see here is what we're going to do is we're going to we're going to enforce that capacity. We're going to see what it does to demand, and we're going to see what it does to margin. So what you see here is very interesting. So the capacity has been consumed. All the vegetable lines are at full capacity. The fruit line, remember, there's no compatibility between fruit and vegetable in Dallas because it's been the most expensive facilities, not that attractive. And whereas the demand fulfillment certainly gone down, the gross margin over here has really started to skyrocket. At this stage, we're at 56 million. Remember, we started at 43 million. And then the final thing, the final scenario we're going to run in this environment is we're going to allow you to build fruit or vegetable across the same lines. So in this instance, in this case study, there were minor tooling changes. There was a lot of labeling changes, but training and minor tooling changes. And all of a sudden, you can use every piece of capacity that you've got. And in fact, the application does that. So it doesn't capture all of the revenue. What it captures is most of the demand, 95.6. The gross margin has really skyrocketed from originally 43 million. We're now up to 64 million. And the demand that's selected to be filled is the most profitable business. So that's what the application is doing there in the background. Also over here, what you're going to see is a couple of switches. And in S&OP, of course, it doesn't make sense to do it without an inventory component, an inventory buffer. So what we see is typically people start off and they use a target inventory, so manually input inventory target, and in which case they use this switch here. Or in June this year, we're launching multi-echelon inventory optimization. It's included within the suite. You've just got access to it as part of the package. And then what you're going to get is very sophisticated optimization to automatically set inventory targets. And that's going to be very powerful. And how do you deploy that in your S&OP application? Well, you turn this switch and those targets expose themselves in the S&OP application. So this group, they feel like they've discovered a lot of opportunity and they want to take it to a financial review with the executive because there's some of the decisions that they feel they can make themselves and some of them not, particularly the market decisions and particularly allowing parcel delivery, because obviously that could have an impact on the relationship with the mom and pop stores. So here we're going to go back to the control panel. Remember, the facilitator owns this panel, and what we're going to do is we're going to start the financial review. And I'll set the scene here. So in the financial review, the team, the demand team and the supply team, the commercial stakeholders have already done a lot of work. And they're basically bringing the summary of various scenarios to this team, and they're asking for decisions or inputs on decisions. Now, what you see here is we're going to solve a number of scenarios simultaneously, and we're going to compare them. And the trend here is from left to right. What you see is the old world. So scenario one is the first three scenarios is hanging on to the chains that really allowed this business to grow in the first place, and prioritizing the fulfillment of demand for these channels. And then as you move to the right, then would prioritizing the demand for the online business. So the online business customers are going to be satisfied first. The scenario on the far right is just pure optimization. So we're going to let the machine do its have its way, if you like. And also what you see in here as you move from left to right, there's increasing operational improvements. So scenario 2 and 3 allow parcel delivery, and scenario 3 also allows the ability to open production lines up so you can make fruit-based or vegetable snacks across these lines. And that's no small thing, of course, because they're in a market that is changing, and that flexibility we're hoping will serve them well. So once again, we're going to solve scenarios, learn to love this button, learn to appreciate the time while it's processing. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the background there. And, you know, it doesn't take long. You know, we've got thousands of rows of data there, and we've got, you know, highly complex models, and we've got 6 scenarios. And here you see it's come back with the answer. So the first thing we should look at here is how demand is fulfilled. So you see with the old world, major chain, minor chain are really taking the priority. And then with the new world over here, you see that the online business is really taking priority. And scenario 6 is interesting because that's pure optimization, and that's letting the model choose which channel you look after. And it just so happens that that's also wants the algorithm wants the online business to be taken care of first. If you look down here, what you see is the different scenarios. Often this is portrayed in a table or a chart with EBITDA. Here we're keeping it kind of basic for the demo. So you've got the revenue and you've got the various different cost components and the margin. And what you see here in these scenarios is that the 6th, 5th, and 6th scenarios are the same, and you've captured by far the most margin, and you've done it without having to fulfill all of your demand. So if you choose, you could still you build some more, but the material difference in margin is really quite incredible over the period of those different scenarios. And then what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in here. So here we've got the different scenarios, and they're mapped together on this chart. And what you see is this huge gap here, and the huge gap is effectively the operational efficiencies that they've managed to achieve. And they've managed to achieve them by opening up the flexibility to satisfy demand from different sites, and also open up the capability to satisfy demand from different product lines, and also by allowing parcel delivery to make it much more efficient to deliver into the outlying areas. But I'd like you to take a look, and it's actually quite hard to see, but I'd like you to take a look here. And this line here is basically the end of the old world. It's scenario 3. The margin looked pretty close, but actually you compare it to the best scenario with the new world, where you're looking after the online business, and that gap is starting to grow. Without analytics, by using Excel, by using an S&OP product that doesn't have strong analytics and optimization capabilities, you're just not going to see that. So what could happen is you could definitely make operational improvements, but you're really not going to see anywhere near as clearly or as early the change in market. So it's really this is allowing them to make a strategic choice to focus on the more profitable channels, and the difference there is only going to get bigger. So effectively what you're seeing, this could be the difference between winning and losing in a market, and you're choosing, the executive here choosing the right path, such that position their business to be much more profitable and position their business to be in the right market and looking after the right channels. So there, what you've seen is a demo of a case where there's a lot of complexities. I think we're bringing analytics to sophisticated analytics to a level that people with deep expertise in supply chain can really be quite effective. And well, how do you get there? How do you get there as a user or a first-time user? So the first thing is there's no guru data scientist involved. They're already involved in building the software at Ames. But what you use to configure your application to make it align with your own business needs is this wizard functionality. So instead of going into a deeply technical implementation, effectively what you do to enable your sales and operations planning application, the way you build it, the way you configure it, is you answer functional questions. If you know supply chain and you know your stuff on supply chain, you can configure our S&OP applications or our other applications as well. So you go through a whole series of Q&A, you make your decision based on the switches, and from that, the application is configured and tailored to your business. In addition to that, it provides you with quite a detailed data requirement, so you can really understand the data that you've got to make available to the model. And a lot of people ask us, you know, what about data? Does this solve the data challenge out there? Well, it doesn't, but it does help. So what you see here is where almost everybody starts is they bring data into SC Navigator through Microsoft Excel. It's readily available. Okay, it's not the most robust, but it allows you to get started, you know, day one, and it allows you to get some outputs within that first week. Any data that you bring into SC Navigator is available to all of the applications. So you might be doing network optimization, inventory optimization. All of that data resides in this intermediate database here. And what we see is organizations mature very quickly. They build integration between MySQL, which is an Oracle-based product. It's very well documented, various different implementation and integration paths with their own business, and such that that data feed is, you know, taken care of, fed and watered, and you've got the automation levels that you need to move forward. The final step is to show you our roadmap. And here what you see is SC Navigator. So we were focused on S&OP, but analytics is across all of the applications that are either available now or in build or in design at the moment. So inventory optimization, you see, can be used in S&OP. A lifecycle navigator can be used on its own. It can also appear in S&OP, or it can be used in network optimization over here. But what we're really excited about is these end-to-end application and the ability, our ability to build true end-to-end applications. So it's been talked about in the market for many, many years. I see some applications that the term is end-to-end, but it's actually very limited. It's often limited to the breadth of the software itself. And this is something that's not yet been delivered in the market, and it's something that we really believe we can deliver. So our first substantial end-to-end application is going to be launched by the end of 2018. And we think looking at supply chain truly from an end-to-end is going to be a major shift in the way people use analytics in supply chain. We are very serious about democratizing supply chain analytics, and I hope that really came across to you. So I hope you enjoyed the session.